Welcome to Sleek Notes E-commerce Boost podcast, your chance to learn from the e-commerce experts so you can boost your business.
Hi guys, you've probably heard this a gazillion times. Optimize your site for mobile. But have you actually done that? I've spoken with Linda Bustos from Work Area Commerce Platform, and this episode consists of tons of tips and insights on how you can optimize your mobile user experience. Like for real, let's do it. So Linda, welcome so much on the show. I'm really happy to have you here.
Thanks, Julie. I'm glad to be here as well.
Cool. If you could just start out by presenting yourself, that would be amazing.
Sure. So I'm Linda Bustos. I am the Director of Merchant Strategy with Work Area. We're an e-commerce platform. And my specialization is in e-commerce UX and conversion optimization, as well as merchandising strategy. So anything really related to digital strategy. And prior to that, I wrote a blog called Get Elastic for a number of years. And I'm currently writing a book called ECommerce Illustrated. And part of the research for that book was literally looking at 1,000 plus mobile sites and taking screenshots and documenting best practices. So if you want to check out ECommerce Illustrated, I actually have the chapters, especially the mobile ones, up there that you can preview. And so you don't have to look at 1,000 mobile sites yourself.
Wow, that's amazing. Really cool. So today we're going to talk about how e-commerce can actually optimize their mobile UX. So what's the importance of a good mobile UX?
Well, I'm probably not the first one to throw out this statistic, but at least half of site visits, especially with the sites that I'm looking at, their analytics, retailers, even email, more than half is coming on mobile devices. And I've actually had clients that have had 75% or more coming through mobile. We had one where only 10% was coming through desktop, and the whole site experience was designed for desktop first. So I think a lot of retailers are still operating that way, where if a banner looks good on desktop, it'll just scale down from mobile, not worry about it. But it's really a lot more important than that. It should be the first device that you consider when you're designing.
Cool. So you just mentioned one common misunderstanding as to what you just said about the header, but are there any other common misunderstandings when it comes to mobile user experience?
Yeah, for mobile use or mobile design, I'd say for mobile design, because it's so mainstream, responsive design is so mainstream, it's easy to find a template or a theme now. You don't have to start from scratch, so you can use a ready-made theme, and that is really cost effective, and especially if you're a merchant that doesn't have a huge roster of designers and developers. Responsive coding is actually quite complex, but the challenge with just using the templates is that they aren't always optimized right out of the box. So I'm talking about like themes that you can find in a template marketplace, or even what your design house might be using to get themselves started. So it's really, really important that you audit any template that you're thinking of using and document all of the optimizations that you need to make to it. Things that I see a lot are like, for example, on a category page, there's usually sort and filter on desktop that's clearly visible, and maybe in a left rail or a right rail where you can find all your subcategories and filters and facets and those things. And that's really important if you're looking at a high level category and there's 100 or 200 results in a search or a category. You want to be able to winnow down through that. And on mobile, that's super hard to do because a couple things, you don't have that extra space, but a lot of templates will shrink down the filters into just a button. So filter and sort will become buttons, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I was seeing it over and over that those buttons were placed after search results. And product results. So those are just template designers that aren't thinking through usability and what makes sense. You don't want to put those kind of navigation controls after a product list. That's kind of defeating the purpose. So little things like that, the way that content reflows when you resize a browser and preview it on mobile, just pay attention to those little things. And sometimes just getting an easy template that's free or $100 takes more money to go and correct those mistakes. So picking the right theme and making sure you document all the optimizations is really important.
Wow, that's really interesting. So this sort of brings me on to my next question. Is it enough to make the site just responsive on mobile, or should you design an entirely different site for mobile?
Well, that's the $1 million question. Responsive design, it has its pros and cons, really. The biggest con for responsive design is site performance because the browser has to read all of the code, all of the HTML. And I mean, different sites are going to have different degrees of responsive page weight and coding and all that kind of stuff. But in general, the responsive design will load slower than if you take the exact same mobile viewport experience and just run it on an adaptive site or a mobile specific platform or domain. So that's where you see companies with much higher IT budgets and that actually have the appetite to maintain two sites will still use adaptive. Like Amazon's a really good example, right? They've got a very fast loading, streamlined site. If you go to Amazon's desktop site, there's a lot of superfluous content, like a lot of ads, a lot like just the homepage, all the different personalization zones, and that's just really hard to replicate on mobile. So for a big superstore like Amazon, like it just makes sense for them to go adaptive. But if you're a mid-market merchant, responsive design is just way easier to maintain. You can get some SEO benefits out of it, and if you do it right, the user experience should be same. But you definitely want to pay very, very close attention to page load speed if you're using responsive.
Let's get a bit more specific. What elements typically create a nice mobile experience, and how should your mobile e-commerce site look? Linda guides you.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about the web is that there's so much freedom and flexibility, and not all sites look the same. So I guess the general elements when you get to a mobile commerce site specifically is you're going to need a hamburger menu or some kind of a global menu, and it's easy on a desktop to be able to scan at a glance and see what kind of product offerings this website has, because you could just see all the text labels for the horizontal menu just right front and center. The larger your catalog, the more complicated your category taxonomy is, and you have to fit that between one little button that brings out this menu that might have 3 or 4 layers deep. So that is probably the biggest challenge, because your navigation menu is that compass that you have no matter what page you're on a mobile site. And especially if you come through a social post or you've come through an email link or search ad and you don't land on the home page, you're landing on a product page. Just being able to reorient yourself around the site, that mobile interactivity of the menu, as well as the visibility and the clarity of what's behind that navigation menu. I've seen several sites, I say several, a lot more than that, but I mean proportionately like a handful of sites for every 100 mobile sites will actually have ambiguous menus. So they'll have the 3-bar kind of hamburger menu, but then another link that says menu. And mobile users just don't have time to intuit your site and and just read your mind about what content lies behind which menu. So that's kind of a challenge, that there's not one set in stone convention of how menus should look or behave or how much content gets shoved in there. But every retailer should be using user testing to make sure that their menus are supporting those customer journeys. And then for things like, just product discovery and stuff, images are super important. And the nice thing is now that that images are, not something that that any retailer lacks skills in. Not like back in the late 90s where you'd see these very grainy, pixelated images, and sometimes the image would just load almost line by line. We're kind of spoiled by these beautiful zoom and multiple images and video and all that kind of stuff. But for mobile, you just really need to make sure that you're thinking about retina display devices and that you're feeding your commerce platform and your content management systems the right formats for images so that they scale down properly for retina displays. So that means you need them basically scaled 2 to 1, twice as big as you want them to render so that the pixels don't get grainy. Okay, I've even seen Walmart, which I think is in the top 2 or top 3 of US trafficked mobile commerce websites. And their category images were super fuzzy because they were violating that rule. So even the big sites can sometimes fall into that trap. So definitely make sure that you're thinking about image clarity and crispness as well.
Wow, interesting. What about things such as design, colors and sizes of buttons and all of this? Are there any best practices there?
Well, we've got a lot of design trends going on right now. So there's kind of like a look, right? If you go across a lot of, especially the theme template galleries, there's kind of like design trends. So rounded buttons and ghost buttons, for example. So a ghost button is like basically a transparent button with usually a white border, maybe a black border, depending on the styling. And those buttons can be a lot more difficult to spot and use on mobile, even though they're really trendy. Another thing as well is just the resizing of buttons and text. And so there's a trend of using light text on, overlaid over images or overlaid over, not necessarily a black background, but something of a lower contrast. And that can be difficult to see on mobile, not just because it's a smaller screen, but sometimes people are using their mobile outdoors or in poorly lit areas. But I think outdoors is actually one of the worst places to use a mobile phone because of the glare, and it can really mess with the contrast, like how your eye actually sees the screen. So I think designers should just keep that in mind. Like there's no perfect color, there's no optimal color to use, but you just have to think about how you're using everything in combination and how you're designing your calls to action to stand out against the rest of your theme and the colors that you use in the other design elements of your site.
Sure. So how can e-commerce sites improve what they really all want to do, don't they? Improve the chance of people adding to cart and completing their purchase on mobile? Because I know a lot of people go on mobile just to do research.
Yeah, that's true. Especially if you're so there's a few cases where sites are particularly prone to just being used for research. So one of them is if you're a brand selling direct. So you've got a lot of physical channels that are reselling your product and a lot of choices and a lot of pricing, but the brand will still have its own dedicated website and a cart and all that kind of stuff. But they find that their sales and conversion rates are really low. And in their case, that might be okay because checkout is kind of a secondary use case. They're really having their mobile site to support the brand. And it's hard to track that touch point where, interacting with your brand site ends up with a purchase. There's things that you can do, like here's a code or a promo code or something when you register your product or something like that might be able to track somebody back to some kind of engagement on the website. But those things are tricky. So for a brand selling direct, you can try and use digital tactics like, hey, sign up for our email list and get 10% off, or something that encourages them to buy from that channel, that makes it a sweeter offer than something local that they could have right away, or something that they could get free shipping on because they're going to a bigger retailer that carries a larger assortment. They can buy your product from your brand as something from somewhere else and get free shipping, right? There's a lot of variables that go into people's purchase decision. So that's like one type of retailer. If you're a retailer that has physical stores and has an online presence, you might have a kind of the showrooming effect where people are researching, but they're intending to visit your store or maybe a competitor or maybe Amazon. So I think everybody's affected by this whole, hit and run kind of situation with using mobile. And sometimes people aren't ready to like cough up or even deal with mobile checkout forms. We know they're harder to use than desktop, and sometimes that mobile view is literally just I'm doing research because I've got time and I'm on the go, but I'm going to finish my purchase on a desktop. So use your analytics, right? Use the tools that, like, analytics are getting better and better at recognizing people across devices. And, especially if you can get someone to log in with like Facebook or Google Plus or something that would track them across multiple devices, because they are kind of sending that information back and forth between those sites that are tracking them. So there's different ways to kind of close that loop, but it's hard. It's just hard. But your question was about how do you get people to actually purchase more? And that's going to be kind of a case by case basis. I'd look at your analytics and see where you're getting the most drop off, where in the purchase funnel people are dropping off your mobile site compared to your desktop site. So if you're seeing people aren't making it past the homepage, you might have a navigation issue, and you should look at that. Other sites might be having quite a bit of engagement and page depth and getting carts added, but they're dropping off at the checkout. So then that would be the place to look at it first. So it'll depend for each customer.
Interesting, but I'm thinking, how do you then optimize, let's say the checkout page for mobile? Is there anything you have to keep in mind when designing that?
Yeah, so I've got a process that I use personally and that I've used with clients. It's a full site audit. So I have basically a checklist of best practices that I look for. And best practices, are not always 100% what you should be using. There's always exceptions to the rule based on a business use case or something else. But, in general, you want to look at the site and just look for kind of low-hanging fruit, things that are easy to change with simple adjustments to a theme, not a ton of coding, that kind of stuff, versus building brand new features and stuff. So I always try and work with what's quick and easy. And then, if there are severe experience blockers that require sometimes even as extreme as a completely different platform, because that platform doesn't support a certain feature or the ability to. So, for example, there was one platform that I was working with its global menu wouldn't go past three layers of categories, right? So you got your top level category, then you've got subcategory drill down 1 and 2, and that's all you could do. You couldn't go down to a third level. And, that was a little bit too restrictive for B2B clients, right? That had very, very complex catalogs and stuff like that. So we're talking about optimization and what can sites do to get better at that. And it's really, looking at what's there on the site right now, how it functions, and prioritizing, making a prioritized list. These things are easy. These things are more complicated and need either more budget or more time.
Cool. I was thinking, you just mentioned it before. What about the forms? Because obviously when you go through a purchasing process, that almost every site has some sort of form you must fill out. Surely there must be something you need to keep in mind when you're doing it on mobile.
Well, the neat thing is, and something that hopefully will come really, really soon, is kind of bypassing the whole form process altogether. And we've kind of seen steps in that direction already. So being able to check out with PayPal and, just log into PayPal once and it kind of pulls all your information back to the retailer. Then you go review it and hit enter. That's a great way to kind of, get through a checkout faster on mobile. Things like Apple Pay are being integrated more and more. So those kind of things, being able to use a Touch ID just to make a mobile payment with your thumb, those things are going to be, really, really helpful for the customer. It's cool. I think everyone's kind of aware in the UX community and the design community that mobile fields are a pain point, and it's kind of this trade-off between you need the information, but we all know that the more fields that you have, the more likely someone is going to get frustrated and give up. So another thing that you can do is use prefill, like a browser prefill. So some mobile browsers support that autofill and stuff. You can also use things like Google has a address autocomplete feature that you start typing in an address and then it just auto suggests what they are. And if you start with country and zip code, then that can get pretty easy to fill in the rest without the user having to henpeck with their fingers. And another thing too is just to make sure that you are picking the right keyboards and coding your fields to pull up the right keyboards for the different types of information. So a really, really common mistake that I see is, especially for number fields. So we've got 4 different kinds of mobile keyboards. You've got the regular QWERTY keyboard with your alphabet. Then you've got another keyboard that you toggle where you can get the special characters and numbers and that kind of thing. So those are those two keyboards. Then you've got a keyboard that has the email address @ symbol pulled out into the main keyboard. So that's a different keyboard that you can apply to the email field. Then you don't have to switch between two different keyboards just to get that @ symbol and then the period, the .com or the .whatever, like those buttons are pulled in. And then finally, there's kind of a numeric keypad that's kind of like your phone's keypad. So those are really great. The numeric keypad is great for fields that are completely all numeric. So for depending on what country you live in, that might be a zip code or postal code that's all numeric, or obviously credit card number and telephone number and that kind of thing. So even just coding your fields to pull up the right keyboard is a way to really, really help customers get through.
That was fantastic. So Linda, thank you so much for your time and your really great inputs.
Thanks, Julie.
It's a wrap. Once again, I hope you like these inputs from Linda Bustos. Before you go, please leave a nice rating. It means a lot. Stay tuned for more e-commerce insights. Cheers!
This session of E-commerce Boost was produced by Sleeknote. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on tactics and strategies that'll help boost your e-commerce.